Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issue number 1 of Phoenix from the Ashes, written by Stephanie Phillips and art by Alessandro Miracolo. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. Now this issue opens with fire and flames burning throughout the vast cosmos. So as an intense explosion of light and energy unfolds, we get a narrator saying its father taught it that their universe is protected by one omnipotent God. And he taught the narrator to pray, to offer thanks for even the misfortunes in their life. So as the explosion radiates outward and consumed everything in its path, the narrator then went on to say that its father believed that their existence should be one of subservience, and that everyone should devote themselves entirely to the one truth, and in the end, redemption will be the follower's reward. But see, the problem, of course, is that redemption, like an omnipotent deity, does not exist. So with that said, on the next page, we see a desolate landscape under a sky filled with fiery destruction. And the narrator goes on to say, redemption is to be chased, never attained. This is not a time for fear, it continues, as we see people in a devastated city, looking up at the sky. But I'm getting ahead of myself. See, I believe it is necessary for any good narrator to disclose their biases, the narrator confesses, adding a personal touch. My name is Adani, and I was born to a priest who, as a child himself, left the Universal Church of Truth after discovering their truth to be one of dangerous contradictions, Adani reveals, providing context to the unfolding events. For under the guise of the belief, the Universal Church of Truth conquered entire populations and offered two options to anyone they encountered, salvation or death. So with that said, on the last panel, we see a child being captured by the church's soldiers, for they caught him trying to escape. Now while her father disagreed with these practices, he may not have conquered worlds, but he was driven largely by fear that only devotion could protect them. Now Adani considered the horrors her father witnessed as a child, ranging from subjugation to torture at the hands of supposedly holy people. So because of that, she tried to have empathy for his position, but after her mother died, his fear only intensified and manifested as a hatred for anything that he could not explain through faith. So with that said, Adani's father confronted the child who tried to run and asked if he would deny the will of the one true. To which the child stated that the will of the one true is that they all must die. So because of that, the child went on to say, the one true that he knew would not ask them to allow themselves to burn, and before he could finish his statement, Adani's father hit him square in the face. So with the deed done, the father walked back to his pulpit and stated that if they run when the one true calls on them, they are certainly not worthy. And with that statement, Adani's father kneeled before his daughter and stated that whether the road is paved with flowers or ash, they will walk it together. So with that out there, Adani's narration went on to say that there is nothing her father hated and feared more than the Phoenix. For the first time she had encountered the Phoenix, she had never heard of Jean Grey or the X-Men of Earth. She then went on to admit that she knew nothing of the crash landing that resulted in the rebirth of a woman forever bonded with the cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force. And she certainly didn't understand the impossible quest for redemption to which Jean Grey had devoted herself. But the one thing she knew was what her father had told her, and the stories of a murderer who destroyed worlds. So with that statement, the father gathered the followers and watched the gigantic explosion in the sky above the planet. And on the next page, the Phoenix appears, its presence consuming suns for sustenance and killing entire species and planets in the process. Now the Phoenix was not just another thing to be feared, Adani observes, but the living embodiment of fear itself, she concludes, as the Phoenix's destructive power was displayed in all its terrible glory. Now years after her first encounter, Adani recalls, I've painted the moment in my mind as a pivotal turning point in my life. And as if some part of her subconscious knew that it would alter the course of her existence permanently. But the truth was she was much less self-aware. And a part of her was glad that her death had been averted. The Phoenix, now seen in its majestic form, confronts the people as Adani's father shouts and says he knew she would come for them and that she would destroy them like she has done to so many before. I am not here to harm you, and your son is dying, and it will take you and your people with it, the Phoenix calmly explains. And she wouldn't let that happen if she had anything to do about it. So following that declaration, Adani reflects on the time she would later spend with Jean Grey, for she considers herself lucky that she shared her story with her. Adani then went on to say, Jean's telekinetic and telepathic abilities were jolted into existence after the death of a friend when she was only a child. Now this death would haunt Jean and help forge her connection with the Phoenix Force. And like herself, one moment in Jean's life determined the course of her existence, altering her path and her relationship with everyone around her. So when Jean first told her these things, she was overcome with grief, thinking of the time she spent as a child lost within her own mind. And it was only later that Adani understood that it was not because of these experiences, but in spite of them, that Jean was able to build a connection to the universe that is unlike anything she could comprehend. So with that said, Adani stands in awe as the Phoenix stood in all her glory, a figure of pure power and grace, with a connection born of fire and ash. And that is where our story begins, declares Adani. With that said, the story shifts to a prison getting sucked inside a black hole. And when we get there, we hear a voice saying, they should leave them, for when the black hole collapses, it will take everything and everyone with it. Because Nova didn't recover from a coma just to die with the prisoners. So with that statement, Nova responded that he wouldn't sentence them to die here, so tell your guards to prepare the transport ships. So with the order given, Cade then proceeded to ask them what? Because these are the most dangerous prisoners in the galaxy and they don't have an auxiliary prison to take them to. But before she could say anything else, an explosion went off and caused everyone to fly off their feet. In the chaos of the prison, alarms blare as prisoners are freed as the sound of breaking doors echoes. Nova quickly came to his senses and shouted to secure the cell doors. But his orders came too late, for Morg was now free and ready to do his worst. And almost immediately, Morg engaged Nova and brutally took hold of Nova's head and smashed it into a wall. But see, Nova was not about to give up, because he retaliated by delivering a thunderous headbutt that sent Morg reeling back. So as Morg held his face, Nova took the opportunity to muster up his power and sent an additional jab that sent Morg crashing to the floor. Now once he was down, Cade asked if he still wanted to transport them, to which Nova maintained his position, but also had to admit that she had a point and they needed some backup. So with help needed, we jump over to Jean Grey deep in space having a conversation with Scott back on Earth in his new Alaskan base. The same Alaskan base we seen back in issue number 1 of X-Men. And during their conversation, Jean tells Scott that the people she saved at the beginning of this story were afraid of her. But that is when Scott corrected her by saying, no, they weren't afraid of her, but rather afraid of the Phoenix. Now this is where Jean had to correct him, because Jean is now one with the Phoenix and the Phoenix is now one with Jean. So with that out there, Cyclops went on to say, they only know about the corruptive powers of the Phoenix Force and probably only through stories. Now following that statement, Jean took a deep breath and admitted that she knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she guessed she still wasn't prepared for how it would feel, for she was trying to save a planet of people who are more afraid of her than the sun that was about to explode. Now with that bit of news, Cyclops had to ask if she was able to save them. To which Jean casually admitted that she was able to absorb the sun's excess energy to extend its lifespan. Now this was something that was beyond what Scott once believed to be possible. So with that explained, both Jean and Scott then went on to share an intimate moment as they linked their minds on a much deeper level. So with that completed, Cyclops went on to say he loves being in her mind, but he still misses her in person. So ultimately he went on to ask Jean if she had a timeline in mind for when she would return. To which Jean replies by saying she is not sure how long she will be staying out there, but she feels that she must stay a little longer. And on a side note, Jean went on to say she really liked what he did with the ship because it reminded her of home, and that was exactly what she needed. So as Jean took off towards her ship, a sharp pain ripped through her head, for a distress signal was issued. So with the call out, Scott says his goodbyes and love yous as she set off to save the galaxy. Now with Jean coming to save the day, we jump back to the prison as an inmate bangs on his glass cell door. For this individual was completely terrified and screamed how they couldn't do this to them. For this frightened inmate didn't have a death sentence in mind. So as he groveled on the ground, a shady individual watched in silence as the man continued to cry out how he didn't want to die. And right as the blue man started to pray, on the next page, a foot drove itself into the side of his head. So as blood ran down his face, the once quiet man stood over him and proclaimed that he didn't need a god to save him, and definitely not the one he was praying to. Now he was praying to a god by the name Magus. But anyway, the blue man pleaded for Pericus to help him, because without him there would be no hope of escaping. Now right after that, the prison once again violently shook, but this time the cell door was open. So with his freedom in his hand, the blue inmate thought his prayers were answered, so as he attempted to make his way to the launch bay, Pericus walked up behind him, and before he could escape, he took hold of him and lifted him in the air and proceeded to take him out. Now with the deed done, his body was cast aside as Pericus made his escape. Now following that, we jump back over to Nova, and let's just say, things was not looking good for him. So as he lay in a pile of rubble, Morg approached him and told him not to die on him, for Morg wanted to kill him himself. So as Nova started to stand up, Morg lifted his weapon above his head, and was moments away for landing his attack, when something interfered, or better yet, someone interfered. For Jean Grey was in the building, and with the might of the Phoenix behind her, she delivered a thunderous blow directly at Morg. So as he lay defeated, Jean took her telekinesis ability and wrapped him up in a ball of steel. So with that threat immediately dealt with, Jean landed beside one of the biggest allies of her people, Nova, and helped him to his feet. So once they were on steady ground, Nova went on to say, "Let me catch you up to speed." But see, that wasn't needed, for Jean states that the black hole is destabilizing and he needs her help to help get hundreds of the most dangerous criminals in the universe to safety before the entire prison falls apart. So with that out there, Nova then went on to say that during the last blast, some of the most dangerous cells broke open. And the Omega Core guards are currently trying to contain the prisoners, but he has no idea how transporting them will be possible. So with everything laid out, Jean, just like before, casually stated that she'll stabilize the black hole herself. Now much like Cyclops, Nova was caught off guard, so in order to prove she could, she brings up how she once absorbed a dying sun. So with the plan in place, Jean tells Nova to just keep the people safe as she set off to do as she said. So following that, we transitioned over to the launch bay, and when we got there, we see Pericus entering a craft, and with great ease, he eliminated the soldier on duty and cast him aside. And after a few clicks of a button, Pericus took the vessel and made his escape. Now with this future threat in the wind, we jump over to Jean's biggest test yet, because no human could do what Jean Grey did on this day. Now she did this not with a serum or mythical weapon, or even ancient magic. Because on this day Jean became the black hole and gave every part of herself to the stars. And while she was there, she felt the cosmos as it moved around her, until it eventually joined her in the dance. So as it mimicked her movements as if they were one, Jean rose with the rhythms of the universe and tamed a beast older than time itself. Now she did not fight, and she did not need to throw a punch, because the cosmos simply did as she asked. For the Phoenix has always been a part of her, from the first moment that Jean retreated from reality, holding her own soul at the edge of death. The Phoenix knew she was the one. Because Jean is and always had been the Phoenix, but in that moment, she showed the entire galaxy what that meant. So with that dealt with, Nova radioed her and informed her that a prisoner managed to escape. And just as he said that, Jean caught sight of Pericus's vessel and immediately made a beeline towards him. Now on a side note, it is said that Pericus was able to defeat Thor before, but anyway, as Jean rushed towards him, her powers started to act up. Because the power within her wanted to warn her about something that was about to happen. For Nova wanted to let her know that this prison was about to explode. So with little options before her, Jean made the only decision she thought she could make, and let Pericus escape into the cosmos so that the prison and hundreds of lives would be spared. Now the narrator stated that Jean's humanity made that decision, for she chose like a mortal instead of a god, because she could not conceive of the consequences. Because on the next page, we see Pericus's craft crash landing in the planet that was saved by Jean at the beginning of this story. And when he exited the craft, he stood right before Adani as the rest of the people ran in fear. And after a brief conversation, Pericus was pleased that Adani could speak his language, because it would help him greatly if she would inform her. But before Pericus could continue his statement, her father rushed to the defense of his daughter with a knife in hand and told him to get away, and what business does he have with them? To which Pericus brings up his connection with the Universal Church of Truth, and states that he is there to answer their prayers and free them from what they fear the most. Now following that, Adani's father, surprisingly, turned down the offer and stated that he thinks it's best for him to leave. So with Adani's father's statement out there, Pericus wasted no time in killing Adani's father in cold blood, for Pericus brought death to Adani's home, and with that said, this issue comes to an end. But anyway, down in the comment section below, let me know your thoughts about this issue and what predictions you could have moving forward. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.